Dr. Verna Lowe is the Associate Dean and Academic Director of Initial Licensure Programs for the School of Education at Western Governors University. In her career, Dr. Lowe developed and modeled a support program for students with learning disabilities in addition to teaching and serving as a school psychologist. SANCHEZ is a school psychologist, education specialist, and the founder of 2E Minds, a company that supports the optimal psychological, creative, spiritual, and socio-emotional development of neurodiverse and twice-exceptional children. TRESHA Stevens is a learning specialist at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, and is a certified gifted and talented specialist who served as a gifted and talented resource teacher for the Falcon District 49 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Dr. Jane Tobias is an assistant professor in the Jefferson College of Nursing at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dr. Tobias, a pediatric nurse practitioner, brings her primary care pediatric expertise to the Jefferson Center for Autism and Neurodiversity, where she focuses her work on creating inclusive healthcare access for individuals with autism spectrum disorder and intellectual disability. Dr. Lowe, we're going to kick off the conversation with you. How do you define twice-exceptionality?
Well, I define it in several ways. I will share that. But first of all, there are several layers with this. In other words, a twice-exceptional learner would have advanced cognitive ability, a type of giftedness, as well as a disability, which could be dyslexia, dysgraphia, attention deficit disorder, or autism or others. But the one way I describe it, another way I describe it is that gifted children have the potential for high performance, but they struggle with different aspects of learning. So they may have a wonderful vocabulary, advanced ideas, can problem solve, but they may have a range of cognitive disabilities that impact their reading, their math, ability to socialize, and understand social context.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lowe. SANCHEZ, because definitions of twice-exceptionality can vary at both the state and local levels, as I understand it, there really isn't any one specific definition for twice-exceptionality. And because of that, is it important for families to develop their own definitions to be able to advocate properly for their children?
Well, that's a really good question. And I would say that maybe it's not about developing their own definitions of choice exceptionality, but maybe advocating for those definitions of giftedness that are a little bit more liberal and more inclusive, and that are able to capture the three different groups of twice exceptional students that are out there. So we have those students who are highly advanced and have many talents that might overshadow the disabilities. Then we have the opposite group where the disabilities might overshadow and overpower the talents. And then we have a third group where the talents and the disabilities mask each other. And so those definitions that are able to capture all those three groups and that having to account more talent domains like the creative domain and maybe high abilities in sports and things like that, those are going to be helpful for families to advocate for their children.
Thank you. So TRESHA, because there isn't a universal definition, there really isn't a typical 2E child, but I'm wondering, do twice-exceptional children at least share some common characteristics?
Thanks for asking, Daryl. Even though the twice-exceptional population is small, it's quite diverse. Oftentimes we'll see 2E children who are described as experts in at least one particular area. Maybe they have an extensive vocabulary or can discuss dinosaurs in great and correct detail. Often they're highly creative and can solve problems in very imaginative ways. Many times they're a student who has a difficult time in an environment where executive functioning skills are necessary, like school. 2E students may have messy handwriting. They may have a hard time keeping up with classwork and homework. Sometimes they're easily frustrated. Friendships are sometimes hard for them because they don't always honor personal space. Sometimes they don't honor or recognize when others have had enough. Many have sensitivities that lead to very strong reactions, maybe to sounds, tastes, light, and textures. 2E children often end up with labels such as intense, busy, quirky, moody, lazy, non-compliant, disorganized, inconsistent, and misunderstood.
So thank you, TRESHA, for that answer. Dr. TOBIAS, it seems to me that one of the issues with parenting 2E children is that the diagnosis itself can be complex. Why is it so hard to diagnose these children?
Absolutely. And I think the first reason is these kids are a dichotomy. They're gifted on one hand, but have so many challenges and difficulties on the other hand. And most schools essentially teach in one way. And if we're not learning in that way, then we're going to have great difficulty mastering the subject, mastering the content. And we know that when that happens, a lot of times these children are labeled as lazy, not putting forth the effort, not being motivated. And again, if they're not taught in the way in which they learn, which is very unique, then they aren't going to be successful. According to the law, it is the school's responsibility to provide that free education and appropriate education. And I think that's the key, appropriate. 2E children learn differently, and it's uncovering that way of learning. It's important to separate, and I think this is key, ability from performance. If they're not progressing, then we need to look a little deeper. Why is that? And I just want to leave you with this analogy of when I explain to parents what 2E means. Imagine if you were in a rowboat and you have two healthy arms that work equally together. When they row together, you're rowing in a straight line and eventually you're getting to your destination. But in children with 2E, they have one arm which is supersonic, which is muscular and has all this strength. And then the other arm is just average. When they start to row, right, they're going to go in a circle because that supersonic arm is going to take over. They get frustrated and they don't get to their destination. So that's where we can help them in identifying why it is they're not mastering and why they're not performing.
Thank you for that. I love the analogy. Dr. Lowe, what is masking and how does masking complicate identification of 2E kids?
Well, it certainly does complicate the identification of 2E children. And it's difficult to identify for several reasons. One of the reasons is that their giftedness can hide or mask or overshadow their particular challenges until they're no longer able to compensate for those difficulties, as we often see as they progress through school. With their disability overshadowing their giftedness, they won't have an opportunity at times for advanced learning. Often they're overlooked. So other words, their strengths can often hide their learning challenges, but their learning challenges can often hide their strengths. So it's very important for us to do further exploration, as Dr. Bias has mentioned. But one of the things I would ask to keep in mind, children who are twice exceptional students, they don't want anyone to know they have problems with an aspect of learning. And they often use their giftedness to hide that learning issue. So it may go unnoticed for a long time in a school setting or other types of settings without anyone being able to address it.
All right, thank you. So, Day, you work closely with these children and their parents. I'm wondering, are there any early signs or indicators that parents could look for that might signal to them that they are raising a 2E child?
Yes, so I would say one of the key traits of giftedness is asynchronous development. And for twice exceptional children, asynchrony is very evident and very pronounced. And so what this means is that there is development that is out of sync. So we might have a child with different ages at the same time. So areas of development like emotional development or intellectual development, they might be out of sync and have very significant gaps. And so one of the things that parents can look for is these differences, these big discrepancies, or these peaks and valleys in development, so that they can also pay attention to other things like maybe high curiosity, ability to problem solve, maybe high vocabulary. They might also have vivid imaginations, or they might have extremes in imagination. So sometimes they might not understand imaginative play, but sometimes they might obsess over imaginative play. They also might ask a lot of questions. They are very curious. They might ask questions about things that are very complex for their age. So maybe existential questions that their parents might not even be able to answer. So all these different things, and maybe this hunger for knowledge and for learning, those are things that I will pay attention to, coupled with asynchronous development.
Thank you. So TRESHA, is there, as a guideline, is there a point in time where parents should start moving towards seeking a professional evaluation of their child?
Well, Daryl, that depends on the child, the parents, and when concerns arise. Oftentimes, parents will have a gut feeling. Perhaps there's something that they just can't put their finger on. They may consult with their pediatrician, or if the child's in school, a guidance counselor. Questions may arise at a parent-teacher conference. The child's smart, but I've given the TOBIAS test. It's a math test with manipulatives to precocious 4-year-olds. And I've also met with unidentified gifted middle schoolers in SPED resource rooms. Testing takes different paths, typically about 2 paths. One looks for the disabilities, and one identifies the student as having high ability. Students may receive a series of tests at school, maybe from a school psychologist or a resource provider. And these tests might include both achievement tests and ability tests. Parents might be notified that their student will take the Woodcock-Johnson or perhaps the Stanford-Binet, for example. Gifted screeners are typically given during the lower elementary years, when the COGAT is often administered to 3rd graders. Sometimes parents will just look outside the school system and take their child to a neuropsychologist who might give the student a series of tests over maybe 2 or 3 days. And these tests might include the WISC and other tests of working memory and measures to determine learning abilities and deficits.
All right. Thank you for that. So, Dr. Tobias, how do you work with twice exceptional children? Is the strengths approach still considered the gold standard today?
Yes, it is. And when we work with twice exceptional children, I also want everybody to keep in mind this spills over into those middle school age and those adolescent years. So really, in my world, it's across that pediatric lifespan. We know that when we appeal to a child's strengths, they're going to blossom. Their self-esteem goes up. They have a more positive outlook on some of the challenges that they may have, and they become successful. So that is why using that strength-based approach is very important. Now, the question is, how do we identify those strengths? In the disability community, we have a mantra, nothing about us without us. And that's kind of what guides my work. I go to the person it's affecting. I go to that child. I go to their family members and say, what are their strengths? What do they do well? What do they enjoy doing? What brings a smile to their face? And then with that information, you start to identify where they are going to excel and how to streamline your educational plan, or how to streamline your plan at home when doing homework, when having projects, when there's a big social interaction, maybe a soccer game or a party coming up. And lastly, we have to be flexible, right? If a student has to give a verbal presentation and they have anxiety, they have a social phobia, Do they really need to get up in front of the class? What is that going to help them with? Can they do an alternative assignment? Maybe work one-on-one with you, maybe write a paper instead. So again, I think using that strength-based approach really guides a student in life, creates that foundation of self-esteem, and then they're able to accomplish many things both inside and outside of the classroom.
Thank you. So, Dr. Lowe, as a parent, when you learn that you're now rearing a child who is 2E, how do the parents move forward? I mean, are there some actionable strategies you can recommend for helping to support and make sure that this child moves forward at the best way for them?
Well, thank you for the question, even though it's a little difficult at times to uh, work with them because they are so very different and unique in their own way. But I got 5 little tips that I would share. The first one is enjoy your child and enjoy your conversations with them. Children, particularly 2E children, have to understand that there are unique characteristics in their whole family unit. And then children will learn to value their own characteristics. So it's important for a family to be able to celebrate together, to work together, and to play together. It's often, we hear this all the time, it's often the little things that count, but I do know that that's true. I have a family member that is 2E. And so it's important when she comes home from school that they have some activities there to be sure that they greet them. Sometimes it's important to put special notes all around the house and in their lunchbox to encourage them, particularly on a stressful day. And it's important for the family to enjoy a project together or Friday movie night together. The third one is that parents can empower their children. And we can't run away from this. So we have to help the child deal with their unique characteristics of giftedness and challenge. And we need to have them work in their areas of giftedness and share that with them. But also when the challenge comes, I've watched parents do this, and I've done this as well. It's difficult to watch them when they struggle. However, sometimes the struggle is important because if we rescue too quickly, it causes the child to think that they are not capable or have the ability to accomplish something. It's also important to increase their confidence by looking at their interest and providing particular coping techniques that can be found in lots of resources, relaxation, focusing on help through that challenge. A fourth one is definitely build their confidence and resilience by focusing on their strengths and interest outside of school. Often that may be sports, type of lessons like music lessons, specialized camp. My family member went to an acting camp this summer and had a great time and realized it was a gift for her. Help them to understand what excites them, do trips to the library, the museum, provide materials and resources at home based on their interest. They're interested in science and chemistry, maybe it's a chemistry kit. Also, you can set up the computer to explore with safe boundaries, and that's an important thing for them to have. They like to explore in their world. The last one is, is to advocate for your child. And I believe that's the most important thing a parent has to really learn. And the key to that is building relationships with all the people that you and the child interact with, which could be the teacher and other adults in the child's life. Be sure to work with the school and work to support the teachers there. But before you bring up any problems, be sure you have that relationship. And then work with the teacher on that. Before you do, though, sit down with your child. Ask them what school is like. You have to have a real understanding of what they're going through. And then with that information and with the information you have as a parent, you can start that conversation with those that are educating your child and show the willingness to collaborate together to support the child.
Thank you. Dr. Lowe kind of alluded to it in her answer just now about the challenges of rearing 2E kids, but could you drill down a little bit for us about what are some of the more common challenges that parents who are rearing 2E kids face?
Yeah, I would say difficulty finding the right educational setting is a big issue for parents, and they usually have a lot of challenges in finding that perfect setting. Many parents don't have the ability to do homeschooling or find an alternative setting. So this is a big struggle for parents, and also the social and emotional learning aspect. These children struggle with perfectionism. This leads to problems in self-confidence, low self-esteem. They often have trouble finding peers that are similar to them or that have something in common with them that they can relate to. They also have trouble with emotional regulation sometimes. So all these different problems in emotional learning, this is a big issue that I see a lot in families. Also challenges with executive functioning. So this is reflected in trouble with organization, time management skills, all those different abilities to pay attention and to follow instructions. So I would say those are some of the main areas of concern when parents have a twice exceptional child. So those are the main ones that I see all the time.
All right, thank you for that. TRESHA, what does the federal law say about 2E kids? Are they eligible to have 504 plans and IEPs?
Sometimes. It really depends on the state, the school personnel, and often the parent's ability to research and advocate. Gifted isn't a diagnosis, ADHD is. So oftentimes 2E students aren't recognized as gifted. So their disabilities may be supported, but they're not always challenged in their areas of strengths.
All right. Dr. Tobias, if you're a parent whose child is attending a school and is not thriving, at what point should parents consider pivoting to some alternative form of education for their child, such as homeschooling?
That's a great question. And Day answered a lot of the reasons when to start looking for alternative education. Maybe homeschooling is an option. And for many kids, that alternative program or homeschooling is a very good option, but it should be taken with great consideration. And I think one of the greatest lessons that we've learned through the COVID pandemic is what happens to our children when they may be set up in an environment where there is some type of social isolation. And we learn that kids just thrive socially. They do much better. Our younger kids, when they go off to preschool, even to daycare, learn through play. They learn social cues through play. They start to build their academic foundation in those early years. And so being in an area where maybe you're attending class through a virtual platform, we have to be really careful about that. We're just starting to see some of those ramifications with our kids. Now, it's not to say that homeschooling is not a bad option. It's an excellent option in some circumstances for many kids. But again, it needs to be a thoughtful consideration and a consideration where you're working with your team, with your teachers, with your pediatrician, with the child themselves and their family, with their specialists, with their therapists to see really at the end of the day, what is the best option, the safest option for this child in their educational setting.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Lowe, in general, can you provide a few tips about how parents can support the emotional needs of their 2E kids at home?
I'm happy, excuse me, I'm happy to. Home needs to be a safe haven. It should be for all of us, but home, it's essential that it's a safe haven where love and patience are the commodities. When children are coming home from school, they're extremely stressed. And so if they don't have a safe place, then that makes it even more difficult for them. Also, teach an attitude of I can do it. Several things children have to learn. They need to know that effort is equated with success, not just an ability or lack of an ability. We want to praise efforts, small steps forward. We also want them to fail forward. We want them to know this: making mistakes happens to all of us. It's part of the learning journey, because often they feel that they are not very capable or that they have anything to contribute when they do fail. They are going to be stressed, and they sometimes feel alone. They don't maybe not have friends. They've experienced a difficult day at school. I know my family member can't stand timed math test. That takes her right over the edge. And so when she comes home, she is not dealing well with that. Keep in mind that that pressure has to be let out somewhere, usually at home. You might see it in argumentative behavior, outburst, anger, confusion. And we have to find a way at home that there's a safe place, and allowing the child to cool down and also converse with them, help them to focus on what have they done similar in these situations that have been successful, but always talk about what to do next time. Emotional regulation is very important. And I think it's important because unfamiliar situations are difficult for them. We have to teach them what to anticipate. So if you're going to an event, teach them what's going to occur, what are the expectations. If you have guests in the home, do the very same thing. One of the things that I always encourage parents to do is have little warning signals to help them regulate their emotions. And that helps to get them to where they feel they are capable and able. It builds some emotional resilience. And always use a soft, kind voice that makes them want to listen and come to you. And last, but certainly not least, remember these become very unique and creative adults to each children do. We just have to get them sometimes through the stressful experience of schooling and all the different things that children encounter developmentally. So I would encourage to enjoy them and explore with them.
All right, thank you for that. Dave, similarly, how can parents of 2E children support their social needs at home?
So I would say working on the emotional intelligence piece and really helping them develop that emotional intelligence is really important, because some of the main foundations of emotional intelligence are self-awareness and awareness of others. And so when children are able to understand their own emotions, and they are able to understand how those emotions are connected to their thoughts and their actions and their behaviors, and they are able to make all these connections within themselves, then they are more able to understand why other people act the way they act. So really helping them build that emotional intelligence is really important. Also, like someone mentioned before, a lot of practice in social skills. It's important to explicitly teach these skills so that they can practice this at home. Usually, if they have siblings, it's a good idea to practice with siblings, and also trying to help them find peers that are similar to them, or that share things or interest with them. So finding activities that they can go to, where they can meet more people and they can practice these social skills that they have been learning within the family unit is really important. So I would say focus on the emotional intelligence development and give them a lot of opportunities for practice and to meet more friends that are similar to them.
Thank you. So Dr. Tobias, this can be a tricky balancing act, I'm sure, but can you give us some ideas and strategies for parents of 2E kids to be able to balance their needs with the needs of their neurotypical children?
Absolutely. And as a pediatric nurse practitioner, this is a conversation I have with parents every day. And it really comes down to just how do you adjust your parenting style? So I like to think of it in terms of 3 words I use quite a bit. You want to be proactive, you want to be flexible, and at the end of the day, it's really about the relationship that you're building with your child, whether they are neurotypical or not. So we know that when kids aren't completely typical, as a parent, we need to adjust. Our parenting style doesn't become or needs to become a little atypical. And how do we do that? We want to be proactive. We want to look at what the week ahead is, what challenges are on the map, and how are we going to navigate them? We have to learn flexibility. I talked a little bit about looking at that map ahead of us, what our week looks like. Included in that is making time for our neurotypical kids, making sure we've carved out time to spend with them, as much as the time and the effort that sometimes goes into parenting our child that's not completely typical. And lastly, at the end of the day, it's about building relationships with your children, right? We don't always get it right as a parent. So we own that. It's okay to apologize your child for losing it because you were very frustrated in that moment. And it's wonderful for your children, whether they're neurotypical or not, to see that as a parent too, you're there to put in the work, you're there to repair those relationships and to make them stronger and to build them. Having a twice exceptional child is really a tremendous gift to the family. It teaches everybody, every member of that family, to be resilient, to have compassion, and to learn acceptance.
Thank you, Dr. Tobias. TRESHA, you get the last question today. So the default hope for parents, or most parents at least, is that their child will graduate high school, move on to college, join the workforce, find love, marriage, and the baby carriage. But I'm wondering whether 2E young adults have such a smooth, straight line launch to their lives.
Well, the 2E kid may not be on everyone else's timeline. Remember, we're working with individuals with asynchronicities, but who still need opportunities to learn and grow and experience life with a level of support germane to their abilities and their wants and needs. Launching is a developmental process. The student may have high ACT scores, been admitted, and maybe even gotten great scholarships to amazing universities. But can they successfully navigate that environment? Now, is it a place where they can thrive? The 2E young adult may pick a path that's different than what their parent had in mind. Perhaps they choose a hands-on computer certification program at a tech school instead of a 4-year computer sciences degree. But that's okay. It's their journey. And as parents, we're here to support and reassure. Parents can continue to chunk activities that a lot of times the activities of daily life, like laundry, it's a multi-step process, and we can guide them through what those steps can look like. Growing up and moving on can be a time of fear and reassurance. It's a time to make decisions and mistakes that everybody can learn from. The twice exceptional individual is still building a cache of resources and practicing skills that may not always come easily or naturally. I work with students and I parent twice exceptional students. And I try to always remember that there's nothing more important than helping them to find their success and happiness.
All right. That's where we'll have to leave it today. Dr. Verna Lowe, Dave SANCHEZ, Dr. Jane Tobias, and TRESHA Stevens. Thanks for the knowledge.